And we are live. Mile high hello, everybody in Broncos country, and welcome into another episode of the Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast. My name is Lance Sanderson. I am your host as always, and joining me as usual is my good friend and colleague. He is your Denver Broncos insider and the senior NFL draft analyst for MileHighHuddle.com. He is the one and only Erick Trickel. Now, Erick, this week is kind of fun, man. It's combine time, and last night I got an opportunity to watch these quarterbacks. The tight ends and wide receivers did a couple of articles late last night. What do you think, man? How you doing, and what's your biggest takeaway from the combine so far?
Man, I love this time of year. The combine is that time where you always get to see those people that freak out and overreact to the numbers that they're putting up. But it's all about adding context to what you're seeing on tape, putting the numbers to it, and just all that. It's not just taking the combine and at face value. It's all the added stuff that comes with it. And, man, some of these 40s times, I think the most impressive for me, I mean, everybody's talking about Henry Ruggs, but Tristan Wirfs and Mekhi Becton have probably been the most impressive workouts overall for me. Man, seeing those guys move at that size, I mean, 4.86 official 40 for Tristan Wirfs, tremendous. Mekhi Becton, what was it, 4.05 40 officially, I think is what it was. 5.06, I can't remember what it was officially. But at 364 pounds running that fast, man, that's about 100 pounds more than me, and I don't think I could probably get close to that. I'd probably be about 3 more seconds running a 40-yard dash in that. But, man, a lot of guys sending out Denzel Mims, Justin Jefferson. We're going to be talking about receivers here today, so I don't want to spend too much time on them. But just got to admit that I am a little bit disappointed in Jalen Reagor. Hopefully his pro day, he provides a little bit better numbers and just helps himself a little bit because he didn't do that at the combine. Lance? All right, guys. Well, today we are going to have a coach on. He's a good friend of mine. He's a good friend of Mile at Huddles. He actually used to be the co-host with Chad Jensen on the Locked On Broncos way back when, and just be tremendous with this. And he has a long history with Mile at Huddle and everybody here. And going to be bringing him in today. His name is Luc Polglaze. He is currently the wide receiver coach at Kenyon College. Very excited to have you on talking about receivers. How's it going today, Luke?
It's going great, Eric. I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm excited to talk some football, excited to kind of get back into the Broncos community a little bit and kind of talk some ball here.
Yeah, and so we had you doing – well, I actually asked you to go and break down a couple of the receivers that we have with that are being linked with the Broncos. And, of course, they're the top guys in the class. I mean, CeeDee Lamb, Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Reagor, and all these other guys. And so just before we get into talking about the receivers specific more in depth, just kind of give me an oversight of what your thoughts are on these receivers that you watched.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I haven't really had a chance to follow much of the draft, but I think kind of the consensus I've heard floating around from folks is that this is a tremendously deep draft for wide receiver talent, which, especially with the NFL's kind of overall direction towards being more of a passing-oriented league, everyone's always looking for quality quarterback play. Well, I think it's just as important to look for quality receiver play. So when you have a draft that's this deep for receiver, it's always exciting to kind of see where some of these guys are going to be, a year from now, 5 years from now, all that. So from the 5 guys I looked at, I was pretty impressed by all of them, for varying reasons. And, I'm excited to get to chat a little bit kind of more in depth with you about them.
Yeah. So with the combine underway, you being a receiver coach, and now we were talking about this before we went live, and you're kind of making jokes about how there's a big difference between Division I and your level. So obviously there's a huge difference between NFL and the level you're coaching at. But with your experience that you have coaching receivers, what would be from the combine of the drills they do? What is that one thing that you'd really be looking for with these receivers?
Yeah, well, and it's not even that it's just the combine. I mean, if you look at the overall recruiting process from high school, if you go to any kind of prospect camp, a lot of these guys are going to be doing pretty similar drills. So, obviously everybody always talks about the 40 and, kind of for having athletes with speed. I think wide receiver is one of those positions where people kind of stereotype the 40 as being really important, which it is, because, a 4.7 guy is always going to be outpaced by a 4.3 guy in a straight line. But you introduce pads, you introduce, grabbing and holding and all that good stuff. And, that's not always the case. So, I think the 40 is important to an extent. You look at your broad jumps, obviously just to kind of measure any kind of explosiveness. is great, because when you're playing receiver, the guy who's the fastest may not necessarily top a guy who's more explosive, right? You want to be able to get a guy who can kind of explode off the line and threaten the DBs vertically. Obviously, vertical leap is important for a wide receiver. I know that the term is kind of in use now these days to moss somebody, but it's a thing, right? To go up and moss somebody, to go up and take a towering catch over someone else. The vertical leap's part of that, and I think any drill really at the combine is important, but I think you got to also mention the 3-cone, just for measuring kind of hips, again, kind of explosiveness, and just I think that translates really closely to route running.
Yeah, that obviously makes a lot of sense. So the one big receiver, I know I had you watch him a little bit, and we were talking about him last night, and that's Jalen Reagor, and you came away pretty impressed with him. So what are some of your thoughts about him?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, I'm not necessarily as versed these days in the draft, or necessarily where these guys are going to rank, at the end of the day, or, I'm not going to be, well-versed enough to tell you, oh, take this guy in such and such a round. I'll leave that to the draft experts like you. But, what I am happy to do is to kind of talk about where I see, these guys, what their kind of primary skill sets being, I think what they'll bring to an offense, and kind of where they'll really win in the NFL. And with Reagor, he's like, the first thing I wrote down is he's special with the ball in his hands. He's a playmaker in open space. And he's one of those guys who, as an offensive coordinator, maybe you just kind of have that little box on the side of your play calling chart, and you just have like 5 or 6 plays that are just, how do I get the ball to this guy? Because he's explosive, right? You want guys like that to touch the ball. You want them to have a certain number of touches per game. I think one thing that he does really well, he's a really great route runner. He's kind of really refined his technique. One thing you'll kind of talk about sometimes with wide receivers is, for lack of a better term, I call it airplaning, right? Which is when a wide receiver, if he's going to run a post, right, he's got low pads, and then the closer he gets to that break point, he kind of gets higher and higher up in his stance, basically, or in his run, in his kind of jog posture. And so, you'll kind of see these wide receivers, and it kind of tips the DB off, right? Because they get to anticipate that a little bit, that if he's kind of slowly getting taller in his posture, right, you're expecting some kind of change of direction. One thing with him is he's got a really consistent pad level. He's really fluid, that he's just here and bang, he's a stick to the post, or bang, stick to the corner, or anything like that. So I think his overall pad level is really consistent, which is, I think, really makes him difficult to read as a route runner. And I think is going to be something that translates really well for him immediately at the next level.
Yeah, before we get to this, I just want to say thank you, Brian Greenfield, for your donation. Very much appreciate that. CeeDee Lamb is the number 1 receiver. I definitely agree there. He's my number 1 receiver. You're scared that Ruggs is a bust. I can get that. I like Ruggs a little bit less than other people do, but I'm still a fan of his. Maybe he is a bust. I'm not so sure. Obviously, time will tell with that. Now, with going back to Jalen Reagor, I got to ask, you mentioned the 3-cone and the concern with the route running with that. Jalen Reagor kind of ran a little bit of a slower 3-cone with a 7.31 3-cone. So how concerned are you about that when you compare that to what you see on tape?
Well, yeah, and I think you kind of look at some of his other numbers, right? Like, he ran much slower in the 40 than certainly I was expecting. And I think that partially goes back to, guys don't always run, on a straight line on the field with no pads on versus how they do in a game. And game speed is a term, and it's a thing. Like, guys perform differently at game speed. But one thing I was really kind of impressed with him was just his releases. He's spent a lot of time, it's pretty evident, like, on his releases, on how he gets off the ball. And I didn't see him try anything in college that he wasn't, athletic enough to do. Like, he wasn't kind of overstepping his bounds. He was playing really well, I thought, kind of within his boundaries. And I think that that's something that's going to really set him up well for success at the next level.
All right. And last question about Jalen Reagor is, obviously can't talk about him and not mention this. He had 7 drops. Most of them were concentration drops at the college level this last season. So as a coach, what would you be doing to try to get Jalen Reagor basically cut those concentration drops out of his game?
Boy, if you could put, if you could distill getting rid of the drops down into a bottle, every wide receivers coach in America would be lining up for that. For me, and it's something that obviously even at my level, especially at my level, guys will struggle with drops. That's the nature of the game for any kind of receiver. I think for me, it just comes down to, being comfortable. A lot of guys will just kind of try and snatch the ball out of the air. My kind of coaching point for that is just to have soft hands. I know a lot of guys they'll kind of just do muscle memory exercises where they'll just have guys, when you're standing, eating your cereal in the morning, or you're like standing making dinner or something like that, just have guys go, here, here, and just have them like actually walk through the muscle memory of putting their hands in those places so that they get, to kind of have that experience. Now, obviously, having drops is an issue that TCU was more than likely aware of, and it's something that they'll have coached him on, and it's something that the NFL will have a plan in place to develop for him.
Now, didn't ask you to watch this guy, but I have to bring him up since you're a Colorado Buffalo alum. Laviska Shenault, just give us a quick breakdown of your thoughts about him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a Buffs alum, and from what I've seen of the games, I've been really impressed. He's been an explosive receiver for them, and for a program that's starting to kind of create some real receiver talent. I think a lot of credit has to be given to their receivers coach, Coach Darren Chiaverini. Like, he's done some great work developing guys over the last couple of years. Shenault, Tony Brown, who's in the draft this year, Juwan Winfrey last year. He's got some really great talent to work with, but he's done a great job of molding them. And I think Shenault kind of takes that mold and he pushes the envelope a little bit further, to the extent that, Colorado has in the past has used him and just lined him up at Wildcat quarterback, right? He's got such a remarkable skill set. He can go up and attack the ball in the air. He's great. He's another kind of one of those guys you kind of just want to have a little block on your play calling chart of ways I can get this guy the ball. I think he's someone who you can use in a lot of different roles, and I think he's gonna have a lot of success at the next level.
All right, and of course with Laviska Shenault, when you're talking about him, he's missed a lot of time with injuries, and right now at the combine, he's dealing with a groin injury. He ran a 4.5 something. I can't remember off the top of my head what the full number was, and then he didn't run a second time because of groin injury. So with the amount of time he's missed, how concerned are you with that going forward?
Yeah, and especially when you're in college and you can't stay healthy, I think that's an issue. But you kind of hope that maybe NFL teams have they've done their background work, they've done their homework on physicals and all that, and that they have a plan in place for a guy and that they want to be able to keep him on the field. At the end of the day, I think a guy like that, maybe he's not a first round risk, but I think at a certain point the talent is going to be there, and you kind of roll the dice. Does the fact that this field is deeper at wide receiver in this year's draft maybe hurt that? Yeah, probably it maybe does, that you'll kind of take a shot on a guy who maybe his ceiling isn't there in terms of talent, but he has a higher floor because he can be on the field, right? That he doesn't deal with injuries.
And so good into the next receiver. You're telling me before we went live that as a receiver coach, one of the things that you went and did was you went and watched Joe Brady and that LSU offense. So obviously you got a lot of time to watch Justin Jefferson. And I know from our private conversations that you're a big fan of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which makes me smile because I'm such a fanboy of his. So getting to Justin Jefferson, since we're focusing in on the receivers, just what are some thoughts that you have about him?
Yeah, and LSU as an offense specifically is so versatile, and they were able to basically line up with the same 5 linemen, Joe Burrow, and the same 5 offensive players. I mean, I don't know all their names, but it was 1, 2, 6, 22, and 81. Like, I can tell you those 5 guys were on the field for them the majority of their snaps, and they lined up in a ton of different formations with those guys. And so one of the things that one of the boxes those guys had to really check was versatility. And they lined up inside, they played slot, they played outside receiver, and so they were really able to kind of move those chess pieces around in a way that was always difficult for the defense to adjust to. And they did a great job of creating mismatches for those guys. They would go empty. They'd put the running back at the furthest wide receiver on one side and the tight end on the other side, which first of all, that's going to be kind of a man zone determinant for you right there. Obviously if it's man, then they'll put a linebacker out on the running back and the tight end. If it's zone, they'll just have a corner out there. And if it's zone, then you're probably going to work a mismatch with a linebacker or an overhang or a nickel kind of inside with one of those receivers. So, I was really impressed with his releases. I thought he did a great job. Obviously, LSU's done a great job working with their receivers and kind of transitioning to a more open spread style offense. And I thought that, obviously Joe Burrow is a stud, and I think that he should be the number 1 overall pick. And I'm not a scout, and I'm saying that because he's a freak. And so, I think Jefferson in particular did a really great job working his releases and, releases and creating space at the line. And, I think it's something that really translates well to the pro level.
Now, not sure if you'd be able to actually answer this question, but having watched Justin Jefferson, about what would you have pegged him at from tape in his 40 time? About what speed would you think?
I don't know what his 40 time was, so I could be like bang on the head here. I could be way off. I would have said probably late 4.4 is probably like a 4.48 or 4.47.
All right, I was actually wondering because he ran a 4.43, which that exceeded my expectations a little bit. Not much. I think it was a 4.46 is what I had him at. So I was just kind of curious about where you would have had him at. Now, the cream of the crop in this class, in my opinion, is CeeDee Lamb. And I know we talked about him, and you can go ahead and repeat what you told me before we went live about basically your notes on CeeDee Lamb. So go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My notes were basically just really good at football. Like, there's only so much you can kind of say sometimes. Like, he's a good football player. Like, don't know what you want from me. And I think, coming from an air raid offense, you talk about having, to getting to work with great talent at quarterback. Obviously, over the last 3 years, he's been blessed with 3 really remarkable quarterbacks. All 3 who had phenomenal college careers, and I think hopefully who will all go on to have really successful NFL careers. Baker Mayfield, electric player. The kid who went to Arizona, Kyler Murray, great player. Jalen Hurts, maybe one of the best college quarterbacks we've ever seen. But I think he's had success with all 3. And I think, for him, he's another kind of guy who you can use in a lot of different ways. I think really of the receivers I've watched in this year's class, the kind of big buzzword for me and the thing I'm seeing with them is versatility. That he's played inside, he's played outside. They'll jet motion him and they'll use him as the kind of the mesh guy, and they're running power read. Like, he's a guy who you can do a lot of things with. I think he's capable of doing, certainly kind of advanced things. I'm an air raid coach. I come from an air raid background and kind of my offensive mentality and the way I look at the game. People will say, oh, he's an air raid wide receiver. He has a different route tree. Yeah, he runs a different route tree, but I think it's the way the NFL is progressing. And you've seen, a very successful spread air raid coach in Cliff Kingsbury get hired into the NFL. He ran comebacks. He ran your shallow crosses. I think he's a willing and capable mesh runner. And, when you're running mesh, which sometimes, honestly, when you run mesh, you're going to get hit. It's a big boy route because you're going to go across the middle, and there are going to be dudes waiting across the middle to knock you off your feet. And he ran it, he was strong in the way he ran it. He was certainly capable. There are guys who are going to kind of tiptoe across that route. I think he ran it really confidently. And I think that, that tells me a lot about a guy and the way that he kind of approaches a route and the way he approaches a play.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned about when talking about CeeDee Lamb is versatility, and that actually brings me to this. Brian Greenfield, he comes in with another $5 donation, which thank you again, Brian, much appreciated. And he says, why is everyone saying we need a speed wide receiver instead of wide receiver like Sutton? I'd feel good with 2 Suttons on a team. How could that be a bad thing? Well, Luke had the buzzword with versatility is you kind of want a versatile group set with your receiver core instead of guys who bring a lot of the same thing. And when you look at high-powered offenses over the last few years, you look at the Denver Broncos in 2013 with what they had with Wes Welker, Demaryius Thomas, and Eric Decker. They brought a little bit of a variance with their skill set. Even the Kansas City Chiefs this last year, everybody's focusing on the speed, which, yes, Tyreek Hill does bring a lot of speed. McCole Hardman brings speed. But that wasn't all they brought. They brought complementary skill sets that Travis Kelce fit in there perfectly. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for versatile skill sets. Having 2 Suttons really isn't a bad thing, but it's just kind of limiting to the offense, and it's just limits what you can really do and how you can open up the playbook a little bit.
I'll throw this out there. As a D3 football coach, if I got one Cortland Sutton out, I would be very, very happy. And, it is different skill sets. And, I think that's one of the things that's amazing about wide receiver is there's so many different skill sets and there's so many ways to win. And you'll have guys who are just faster than the DB. I had a freshman this year who started 6 games for us. He was, one of our best receivers this year, led our team in touchdowns. Like, I literally, like, I taught him different releases, and I'm going to continue to teach him different releases. He ran speed release all year. Like, your single release is when you kind of come to balance and then like give a head shake before you release. Speed release is when you just run fast. And he was faster than everybody else. And like, that's fine. Like, you don't always have to win with, all these different kind of releases and moves at the line. Like, you'll have that. You'll have your taller guys who just kind of out physical their opponents. There's all these different ways to win it kind of in space. That's one of the most exciting things to me about being a receivers coach is honestly that, everything happens in so much space that you have to be an athlete to operate in space, to kind of have that room to work with.
Yeah, and when you're talking about that, Nick Kendall, he actually tweeted something out, I think it was yesterday, that wide receivers aren't always equal to other wide receivers. Like when you're talking about famous ones in history, Randy Moss type receiver isn't the same thing as a Wes Welker type of receivers. So it's all that versatile skill sets, and just the things that you can do with that versatility in an offense is outstanding. And going back to CeeDee Lamb and just continuing to talk about him, if there was one concern that maybe even if it's just the slightest thing that you have to nitpick at, what would it be for you? Because for me, if I had that one thing to nitpick, is that he just doesn't have elite speed. And that is something that in any kind of offense, you can be fine with the skill set that he brings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's certainly something you could nitpick. If I was going to be really, really nitpicky, I think his hand placement could be better against press coverage. Like, we're really kind of just taking a scalpel to the knit and just trying to drill down to whatever's inside at that point. Like, you're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Like, he can play. I think he's going to be a fine professional football player.
Yeah, and going on to the last few receivers that we have that we're going to be talking about, you got to get this guy out of the way. Bronco fans, they want him so badly with Denver. He ran a 4.28 40 time. Henry Ruggs out of Alabama. What are your thoughts on him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, if you look at the first 6 lines of my notes here, world-class speed, but that's obvious. It's something that really jumps out at you when you watch him. Like, he's fast and, kind of similar to my freshman receiver I was talking about. I'd like to see him be a little bit better with his hands against press coverage, I guess, again, similar to CeeDee Lamb. Like, I think his speed will translate. He's got game-changing, game-breaking speed. I think kind of as a result, you see he has a great speed release. Like, he doesn't have to always work these moves because 10 times out of 10, he's going to be faster than the guy across from him, again, in a straight line across 40 yards. I don't necessarily love his footwork at the line. I think he can do a little bit better to kind of improve his technique against press coverage. He adjusts really well to the ball. One thing that I will kind of pick with in terms of picking nits with him, a lot of times you'll hear receivers coaches talk about what's called the red line. Basically, the red line is this imaginary line that's drawn between the bottom of the numbers and the sideline. And when you're releasing outside, you want to keep the red line because that allows your quarterback space to throw towards the sideline so that you can always fade back towards the ball, but you want to give your quarterback some space to place the ball into. It's one thing I think he has issues kind of being rerouted sometimes, that he gives up a little bit too much and he'll be a little bit outside that red line, which doesn't give your quarterback as much room as you would like. So that's absolutely something that I would imagine that the NFL has watched that and identified that. And, a lot of practice fields, especially at the college level, will have a painted in red line on the field that they can say, hey, you're outside this, get back in.
Now, one of my big concerns with Ruggs is that watching his routes, and I am in no shape or form an expert on wide receiver. That is probably one of the positions I'm worst at. That and cornerback, I mean, just not my best work there. I'm definitely a guy in the trenches, defensive line, offensive line, linebackers, edges. No, that's my place. Now, with watching Ruggs, one of my big concerns with him is that his routes, he seems to not necessarily go 100% speed throughout his whole route, but he doesn't always throttle down. He may start out 80% and then come out of a break and hit that 100%. But there's just no much speed variation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that's a feel thing as much as anything when it comes to playing the wide receiver position. I think and we'll kind of talk about this in a sec, but, Jerry Jeudy does a great job of setting up his moves in advance. And I think so much of being a wide receiver is about feel and about, sometimes it comes down to as simple as when you're running a dig and you get up to like just kind of when you're running at the safety and I'm going this way and he like you don't want him to know you're going that way, and it's just you kind of hesitate, give a head stick this way, stick, and you're gone that way. Like so much of it, wide receivers who are really skilled at route running can use little subtle things in their body that it's just like if you've got a DB, we'd use this term stacked, where say it's one-on-one, it's man coverage, you've beaten him off the line and you're past him, right? He's stacked. You put him in you use the term, you put him in your back pocket, right? He's behind you. He's at a significant disadvantage right now because whatever you do, he's got to react to and he can't really anticipate it. If you're running, you've got your red line, right? We just talked about that. And, you want to give kind of a head, kind of a slight stick to the corner and then break to the post. It's those little subtle things about route running that it's, those nuances can take some time to develop. And especially when you've got, 4.28 speed, I think not only the body positioning and the way you move your head or kind of dip a shoulder and things like that, but especially kind of as you refine it, that you kind of slow down your speed and then accelerate into things like that can also help.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And you brought him up, so let's just go to him. The Alabama teammate, it's more like a quadruplet with that receiver core with Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith as well. But let's go to the other receiver that's actually in this draft class with Jerry Jeudy. I mean, just giving a quick take on mine. I mean, this guy's routes are fantastic. That's going to be how he makes his life in the NFL is through his route running, and just can be that reliable guy for a quarterback. But you're the receiver guy, not trying to take away from you. So I'll let you go ahead and let's hear your thoughts about Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah, and I think, as opposed to the LSU offense where they had roles, they certainly were kind of, that they did this and, in a certain formation they would line up this way. They had some versatility into kind of what they were asked to do. Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, like you could tell there was a little bit more refinement as to what their roles were. Ruggs was more or less the speed guy. And I think Jerry Jeudy, as a result, was asked to run some more kind of complicated, like double, triple, you can call it stem or double move routes. But I think, that kind of was just more a byproduct of his offense and in terms of having 5 all-world trench guys to kind of protect the quarterback. So, I think what he was kind of asked to do is a little bit different from a Henry Ruggs kind of guy. I think he has great stems, great moves. He, like I was just talking about, he uses his head so effectively in routes that he'll just kind of give that little nod or just kind of a duck and kind of, just impact a DB, just kind of cause an effect just a little bit for them to kind of not necessarily, anticipate where you're going. I think he's incredibly smooth. He's incredibly polished. He's got good releases. He wins with the speed release despite not being that fast of a guy. Of the guys I watched, I think he's probably, certainly someone that you'll hear the word pro ready thrown about because he's really polished all around. He's got some rough edges to his game. And again, I'm a D3 receivers coach. I'm not going to challenge an Alabama receivers coach on what he needs to be a lot better at, but he's got those little rough edges that I think you can polish up. I think the red line is kind of another one of those that he just gives up a little bit too much room outside. When you have 2 guys on the same offense doing that thing, you kind of have to pause and ask yourself, okay, is this something that's now kind of being coached a little bit? So I think that's something you'd like to refine for him coming to the NFL, but it might be something that he's given a little bit of liberty, a little bit of freedom with at the college level.
Yeah, and since we covered Jeudy, I'll just go to this. Brian Greenfield comes in with yet another $5 donation. Again, thank you, Brian. We appreciate that so much. And he asks, would you guys take another receiver outside of Jeudy or Lamb over Ruggs? And for me personally, those are my top 3 receivers right there. If Lamb and Jeudy aren't there at 15, then I would be taking Ruggs. If that's the way that we're going to go, of course, obviously depends on who else is there. I wouldn't take Ruggs over a Tristan Wirfs, but if that's the best receiver, that's the best player on the board, I'd go Ruggs. There's no other receiver that I have higher than him at this point. Basically, Laviska Shenault, his injury concerns have dropped me a little bit, especially with him dealing with the groin injury. So there's no other receiver that would be taken over Ruggs at 15 at this point.
Yeah, and I think so much of that depends, too, on, what are you looking for in your offense? Who do you have on the roster? is a guy who's a bit more of a chess piece as opposed to just a speed item. Like, what do you need? Do you need offensive lineman? Do you need receiver? I think all of that is a balance. And, I don't necessarily know if I'm in a great position to say, just because I haven't watched everybody in the class, to say, take this person over this person or anything like that. But, I think all three are going to have really strong pro careers. Maybe some developing a little bit sooner than others. Alabama is a hotbed of talent, and, they've had some great receivers go on and have some great success in the league. And, I don't think it's fair to compare those guys straight up, head up to, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, anything like that. But, the school has put together some okay wide receivers, huh? They've put together some nice guys.
So, all right, guys, there's one more receiver that we want to talk about before we get around to taking your questions. And I see the Mile Huddle is coming in with the Denzel Mims, that is all. And that's actually the last receiver we're going to be talking about. I actually made you watch up on him before we went live a little bit, just because of the combine he had. Tremendous combine, outstanding. So just some quick thoughts about Denzel Mims before we get to taking some questions.
Yeah, and I think, kind of similarly to some of the air raid things. Again, I'm an air raid guy, so I'm never going to sit up here and tell you that air raid is not the way to go. But, I think you've seen enough quarterbacks translate really well to the NFL out of the air raid, and I think that the kind of that there's some I don't know what the word is, not misgivings or anything like that about air raid quarterbacks, but I think that they've done a great job of kind of removing that bias about air raid quarterbacks, and I think we're starting to see the same for air raid receivers. He, I think, has had some issues with getting rerouted. For being a big guy, I'd like to see him be more physical. I'd like to see him kind of dominate against press coverage a little bit more. He's obviously a strong blocker, and I understand from you that he's talked about his willingness and his love of getting to block, which is what you look for in a receiver. He's a really smooth route runner, especially for a guy kind of that big. It's great when you have kind of just a guy who really transitions well from a release into his initial stem to a break to second stem, anything like that.
Now, one thing with Denzel Mims is at one point he used to be a big sleeper of mine. A lot of the conversation based around him going somewhere day 3. I think it's very safe to say after the Senior Bowl he had, where he absolutely killed it, and the Combine again, where he absolutely killed it. I think we've reached that point where round 1 isn't out of the conversation because his tape is really strong, and what he did there just added a lot more to it. But Evan McKinley comes in with a $4.99 donation. Thank you, Evan. Much appreciated, as we appreciate all donations you guys give us. I mean, just means a lot to us. And it says, if all position needs are gone at 15, one mock I traded back to Seattle's pick, gained a second, would you grab Justin Jefferson, Denzel Mims, or Jalen Reagor? And is that a good move? Well, we spent some time talking about the receivers to start the show, and so I'm actually really curious about this. I know that you're not so in tune with where these players would go, but all 3 of these guys are getting talked about as late first round, early second round picks. So just so you are aware, if you had to pick one for the Broncos with what you do know about Denver, which one would you take?
That's a great question. And I think, I guess let me kind of come at this from this direction. I think that there are very good reasons that you can pound the table for each one of those guys. For Justin Jefferson, you can pound the table for his versatility. You can kind of play him in a lot of different places. I think he's going to contribute for you early because he's ready to. He's faced big stages. He's faced the national championship. He's had a pro level quarterback throwing him the ball already. Like, he's going to fit right in just fine. Denzel Mims, he's a big guy. Obviously, he's an athlete. He's maybe not as refined as you would like just yet for an NFL receiver. If I'm a wide receivers coach, that's fine. I'm going to gamble on myself. I'm going to say, hey, give me this guy. I've seen what he can do. He's an athlete. Like, I will coach him up. I'll get him better. And if you have the right personnel in place, then I think that's an absolute thing that you can do, is just say, hey, this guy's maybe not there. We're gambling on his ceiling. We're going to take him. And then obviously Reagor, he's a freak with the ball in his hands. Like, sure, the Combine maybe necessarily didn't kind of, it kind of raised some issues, maybe raised some questions about him. But with the ball in his hands, he's a force to be reckoned with. He's special in open space. And so for me, like we just talked about, there's so many different models of success for a wide receiver, and there's so many different ways you can kind of find success and find guys who are going to win at the next level for you. Do I need, if it's a question of do I need a guy who's going to play right away? I'll take Jefferson. Do I need a guy to kind of inject some X factor into the offense? I'm going to take a Reagor. Or if I have some room to kind of develop a guy who doesn't necessarily need to be ready to go day one, then I'm going to take a Mims. I'm going to gamble on the development of the team. I'm going to gamble on having years of him working with a young quarterback in Drew Lock and having them develop some consistency together.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to this. I just want to say, guys, that we are running a little bit long, so we don't have that much longer in time for being able to take your questions. So if you guys have them in, get them in now. I do want to voice my opinion about this, though. And basically from a Broncos standpoint, being a analyst of the Broncos and the senior draft analyst for the draft when it comes to Mile High Huddle, is at this rate, I think I would actually probably lean Justin Jefferson. Luke kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit about needing a guy who can come in and kind of compete right away, and that's Justin Jefferson. And while they do need an X factor, that does make me kind of want to take Jalen Reagor, but I'm looking at Justin Jefferson. I think he can be a tremendous compliment to Courtland Sutton and just bring a lot to the offense, and he can try and get that X factor at another point. And Wannabes, who is actually a good friend of the show, often commenter on MMH and everything like that, and he comes in and asks, is head movement something a wide receiver can use to make more effective double moves? I'll let you take this one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a term in kind of wide receiver coaching that's called a rocker step, which is basically, if I'm running what's called a corner post, that you're breaking first to the corner and then to the post, right? So if I'm eventually going this way, when I kind of run, I'm getting to my depth where I break the route. See, I'm kind of airplaning here. I should be kind of down here, right? Staying consistent with body posture the whole time. I'm going to plant my inside foot here. I'm going to break to the corner, and I'm going to flip my head and shoulders just because that's going to give the impression, hey, this guy's going to the corner, right? He's breaking hard here. Break to the corner, heads here, and then again with the same body posture, take one or two, pretty much one kind of bang, 2, 3, bang, and then break back to the post is what's called the rocker step. So yeah, head movement with that is so effective because if you have a guy who's always going here and his head is always going here, he's bang to the corner, but his head's still there, and then he's back. That's not going to sell it nearly as much as a really effective head fake will.
All right, and then just as a courtesy to Nick, because he's asking us about it. All right, you watch these 6 receivers. Sorry, and we can throw in Laviska in here. How about we give you give us your quick rankings of them?
Okay, from having not ranked them and from just scrolling through my notes, this is what you're going to get. If I had to walk in tomorrow and start coaching these guys, I would go Jeudy, Lamb, Ruggs, Reagor, Mims, I think. Oh, I'm forgetting Jefferson, aren't I? Man, and again, they all win in different ways. I would probably stick Jefferson ahead of Mims, I think.
So basically Jeudy, Lamb, Ruggs, Reagor, Jefferson, Mims, and where would you put Laviska?
Oh my God, stop. You're asking me to do these things now. Again, if you're gambling on his injury, if you're gambling on him being available to you, then I think you got to put him after Ruggs. Because I think he's a guy who's going to be able to contribute immediately, and he's a great athlete, and I think he's going to give you a lot of options.
All right, I actually,
this to me, man, you got to stop doing this to me.
I'm actually not that much in disagreement. I mean, Lamb is my number 1, Judy's my number 2, and there was a lot of positive stuff coming out from Laviska's injuries and saying that he was more missing games due to just concern about long-term damage and making them worse instead of him not actually being able to play. But that groin injury made me concerned. So he actually was my number 3. He's now dropped a little bit after that groin injury, and Ruggs is now my number 3. And then Reagor, Jefferson, Mims, that falls pretty well in line with what I have. And just going back real quick, because there was something you said that I wanted to address earlier with Mims about betting on yourself as a coach to be able to coach them up. There's a lot of things. This is something that fans often don't take into consideration. There are a lot of NFL coaches that they will bet on the athletic player and their ability to coach them up. we've seen that time and time again in the NFL draft. Guys with athletic ability going super high because coaches, there's arrogance in a coach about their abilities. They think they're the greatest coach ever and that they're going to be able to get the most out of the guy. So that's something that has to be considered in and factored in with everything.
I'm also going to push back on that a little bit as a coach. Not necessarily arrogant, but if I see a shiny new toy, I'm going to want to play with it. Would I, in a conceivable universe, want to coach any one of those 7 guys? The answer is yes. Okay. Give me all of them.
And Terry Randall comes in with a $5 donation. Thank you for that, Randall. Again, much appreciated, as we appreciate every donation you guys give us. And Brian Greenfield comes in with another $5 donation. He goes, only wide receiver I'd trade up a couple spots for is CeeDee. Any other players would be worth realistically to give up a third. There's only 2 players in this class that I might be willing to move up for. And I'm a big proponent of, very anti-trading up. I don't think that there's the value in it. Basically, hardly ever. But I kind of agree with CeeDee Lamb if that's the way you want to go. If you want to go to receiver, he is the one that I would move up for. But Tristan Wirfs is another player that I would be willing to move up for. And if he manages to fall just even slightly, 2 guys actually, Derek Brown, the defensive lineman out of Auburn, if he manages to fall, and Nick's going to grill me for this because I can never say his name right, Jeffrey Okudah, the cornerback out of Ohio State. I always pronounce it wrong. I hear it correctly, but it just comes out wrong. I'm terrible with pronouncing names. But I'd move up for him too. Those are the only guys that I'd even consider it for. But even then, I'm very anti-moving up. I just don't think it's hardly ever worth it.
Can I just throw in a note on CeeDee? As a guy who's a huge fan of football and of really good football games, I think there's something to be said for guys having great performances and on big stages. And kind of one of the big games that really cemented CeeDee Lamb as being a really good football player for me was, Oklahoma, Georgia in the Rose Bowl a couple of years ago in that amazing overtime game. And he kind of he came out and he shone. He really took the advantage of having a big stage and of having the opportunity to kind of succeed on that big stage. And it's not like he was, languishing in the shadows and they just pulled him out and dusted it off and said, this Velociraptor will do just fine today. He's obviously already an athletic freak. But it's kind of similar to a guy like T. Higgins for Clemson, who just absolutely shredded things in the college playoff last year. Guys like that who kind of come and take advantage of big stages, the moment's not too big for them. They'll absolutely be able to succeed in the NFL because, in some cases they might be playing in front of smaller crowds or, less vociferous crowds. You can say what you want about SEC football and, not running the ball and all that, but let me tell you, they get loud. They get rowdy. Those are some pretty loud crowds.
All right, guys, this is the last call for questions. I do see 2 more that I do want to take before this, but if there's any others, then now's the time to get them in. But the first question that I want to take is Miller707 Champ. It goes, what's your opinion on Michael Pittman? I'm not sure if you've done any work on him, a USC receiver. He's a bigger receiver, not a carbon copy of Courtland Sutton, but very similar to him and with how he plays the game and everything. And if Denver needed that, I would be all for him. But I like the player. I wish him nothing but the best in the NFL. I think that he will actually have a very solid career, but he needs to go to the right team that can utilize his skill set and fit that in to what they need at the receiver core.
Yeah, I haven't watched hardly any of him. If I'm not mistaken, he shredded Colorado at one point this past year. I think I was watching that game and I was like, this guy's a problem. I remember him doing things that I thought really highly of in terms of technique, but I couldn't tell you a whole lot more apart from that.
And then the other question is from Brian Greenfield, and he asks, how many receivers do you think guys go in the first round, and what steal away wide receiver in the second round? Well, that's a little bit hard one to answer because right now, after the combine, after watching what Jalen Reagor did, there's been a lot of conversations I've had that are kind of iffy on where he goes. A lot of people are saying that he's still a first-round guy, but there's been quite a few guys who have also mentioned that they think he falls out of that first round now. So I think that we see at least 5 receivers go in the first round, and if Jalen Reagor, or Denzel Mims happens to fall to 46, I think that those guys can be a tremendous steal for the Denver Broncos or any team that drafts them. And then Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State is another receiver that I think could be a tremendous steal. And one last name is Donovan Peoples-Jones. I was kind of low on him after watching what he did with at Michigan this last year, but the dude's athletic, and he was probably the receiver that was hurt the second most by absolutely abysmal quarterback play, right behind Jalen Reagor. He dealt with terrible quarterback play, and he still managed to be pretty impressive.
Yeah, and that's the same thing we kind of talked about with Denzel Mims is, you kind of gamble on the upside of a player's athletic ability, and I think I would imagine a very key element of that is the interviews at the combine, that you sit a guy down and you get him on the board, because if you're drafting a freak, an athletic freak, then you want to be able to say, okay, this guy's coachable, or you talk to his coach, or you look at what he's doing on the field and you can say, well, I can tell that he's learned how to do that. Like he's learned that. That's coachability right there. I just tried to Google, and Google didn't tell me this. I was trying to find out what the most receivers that's ever been drafted in the first round is. I'd imagine it's probably in the neighborhood of 5 or 6.
I think so. And here's one thing about this is I can't remember which one. One of the ESPN guys projected, I think it was like 29 receivers to go in the first 3 rounds, and I think the high is like 16.
Yeah,
that's a stretch. I don't think 29 go, but I have 19 in my top 100 players. Like, this receiver class is ridiculous. And go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Even as a wide receivers coach, I wouldn't take a wide receiver on average every 3 picks.
Yeah, that's pretty outrageous. And Rahel Nagatu comes in, and who will the Redskins draft? Please be good, since I'm a Redskins fan. I think in the end the Redskins walk away with Chase Young. Getting that edge rusher is such a valuable part of any defense, any football team. You got to have that guy to go get after the quarterback, and he's the best one in his class. To me, he's the best player in the class. But obviously, Joe Burrow, the Bengals, that's. I think you can be pretty confident in writing that down in Sharpie that's going to happen. And I like Chase Young. I'm not buying this quarterback talk, but we never know after watching what the Arizona Cardinals did with Josh Rosen to Kyler Murray. So who knows? New coach in town. Maybe they go that route. But I in the end, again, I think it's going to be Chase Young.
Yeah. And, just to kind of step back real quick for a second, if the most that's ever gone is 5 or 6, we've talked about 7 receivers tonight who I think are all, effective receivers and who are all going to be able to contribute early. And, I think it kind of depends if you're weighing those guys up as having a first round value or not. I think all 7 of them are someone that I would absolutely take on a football team, not knowing anything about the scheme or the talent in place or anything like that. But I think as a result, if they're available in the 7th or in the second round, and I have some imagination that at least one of the 7 will be available, I think any one of them would be a good get there.
All right, and then last question we're going to take is from Brian Weatherwax, and he asks, thoughts on Lynn Bowden Jr. with one of our thirds, could be a steal, multi-talented at different positions. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he is a guy who he played quarterback, receiver, running back, return man, all this stuff for Kentucky. Super athletic freak.
Oh, yeah.
More athlete than football player at this point. Yeah. But this is one of those things that you kind of talked about earlier about betting on your ability to coach a player up. I like Lynn Bowden. I think that a third might be a little bit early, but with how athletic he is, who knows? It's with how teams can bet on themselves with taking those athletic players. It's hard to really gauge where he would go, but I think that with the right coach, he can end up having a very solid career as just a weapon for a team on offense and special teams.
Number 1, right, for Kentucky? I think you're the right guy. Yeah, the big stocky guy. Yeah, I mean, Kentucky's a team that has been really successful recently of kind of moving guys around a little bit and, putting them in good positions. And, I mean, obviously they're the Wildcats, but if you're watching Wildcat formations in college football these days, I think they're kind of one of your go-tos that they do that really, really successfully. If I'm not mistaken, I know he played quarterback, but I thought he was a Wildcat quarterback before that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So yeah, and I think as a result, again, you're kind of betting on yourself, but it's a trend. We saw the Jaguars do it a couple of years ago with shoestring Denzel Robinson.
Yes.
Yeah, and they literally put him on the roster and gave him a brand new position designation of OW offensive.
Yeah.
Like, embrace the change. It's coming.
Yeah. All right, guys, but that's going to do it for us. Unfortunately, if you haven't noticed, Lance's internet went out right when we got into this, and he just thought that with his internet giving him problems that we probably won't be best if he joins in. And actually, TG comes in with a late donation of $20. Very much appreciate that, as we appreciate all donations you guys give us, man. Thank you so much. He goes, I agree with you, Trickel. Those are the only guys I trade up for. Well, thank you. I like when people agree with me. It means a lot. But
I won't,
yeah.
so I can say that much.
Yeah, it's nice when people agree with me because my colleagues at Mile High Huddle often don't. So I don't know what it is. There's something wrong with them. But anyways, it's been a wonderful show having you on, Luke, man. It's just, I mean, you're such a good friend and everything like that, and we definitely miss you here at Mile High Huddle. But we're glad you're on to bigger and better things with coaching college football and being able to get your insights. And hopefully the people watching this were able to learn a little bit more about it. I mean, some of the stuff that you were teaching was just sharing was just a tremendous thing that just regular fans can take away from. So thank you so much for joining me, guys. Just so you know, next week we will have another guest on, and he did a community mock draft with the Draft Network, and he's going to be coming in and he's going to be talking about that draft and how things happened and fell and everything like that, and the picks that he made for the Denver Broncos. Obviously, it's going to be after the combine, and I think it was done in early February, so there's going to be a lot of changes to it. But we figured that would be a very interesting listen for you guys, hearing about somebody who's not part of the Mile High Huddle staff and their mock draft. So hopefully you guys tune in for that. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Luke, for joining me. And please, everyone, have a wonderful night and stay safe out there.